In the silent darkness of space, a forgotten object drifted above the Earth. It was an old Soviet satellite, launched in the year 1967. For decades, it had been nothing more than dead metal, spinning slowly in orbit. The world had forgotten it. Even Russia itself no longer tracked it. It was a relic of the Cold War, a time when the Soviet Union wanted to control the skies. But now, after nearly 60 years of silence, the satellite had come alive again. Inside a secret observatory in Moscow, alarms began to flash. A young technician stared at his screen, his heart racing. He could not believe what he was seeing. The dead satellite was sending a signal. It was weak at first, but growing stronger every second. The transmission was not random noise. It was organized. It was sending coordinates. The room grew colder as fears spread among the scientists. They had all studied satellites. They all knew how they worked. But this one should have been nothing. But floating junk, no power, no energy, no working instruments, and yet it was speaking to them. Whispers ran through the observatory. Could this be a system reactivated by cosmic radiation? Could it be a mistake in the instruments, or was there something more? Something hidden inside the old machine. The coordinates pointed deep into Siberia, a place covered in endless snow. And silence, a place few dared to visit for years. There had been rumors about this land, stories told by hunters and travelers. They spoke of strange lights in the night sky, of animals disappearing without a trace, of people who went searching and never came back. But the government had always denied it. Now, with the satellite alive, those old whispers no longer felt like fantasy. They felt like warnings. Among the scientists was Dr. Alexei Morozov. He was a man in his early 40s, quiet and serious. His father had been a Soviet officer during the Cold War. His father used to tell him stories about secret projects. Projects that were too strange to be real, but Alexei had never believed them. Now, staring at the satellite's transmission, he felt a strange fear. The numbers on the screen matched a location he had seen once in his father's old documents. It was a forbidden zone, marked only with one word, Zashita, which meant protection. Alexei's hands trembled. The satellite seemed to be calling, sending the coordinates over and over again. Not once, not twice, but in a continuous loop, like a desperate voice trying to guide someone there. The room filled with tension. Phones began to ring. Officials arrived. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Why had the satellite woken up? And why now? After so many years, the head of the observatory tried to calm his team. He said maybe it was just a glitch. Maybe the old circuits had come alive for a short moment, but no one believed that. The transmission was too clean, too perfect. It was as if the satellite had been waiting all these years for the right moment, waiting for something buried under. The ice to awaken, Alexei could not sleep that night. He sat in his small apartment, staring at the coordinates. The numbers repeated in his mind. He could almost hear them whispering in the silence of the room, like a song he could not escape. His heart told him this was not only a mystery, it was a warning, and warnings were meant to be understood, outside. Moscow's winter night was calm. Snow fell softly, covering the city in white silence. But in Alexei's heart, there was no calm. There was only a storm of fear and curiosity. He felt the weight of something greater than himself, something ancient, something terrifying. The satellite had returned from the dead, and it was pointing the way to a place man should never go. The next day, news of the reactivated satellite spread quietly among military officials. They held secret meetings, their voices low, their faces pale. Some wanted to send soldiers, others wanted to ignore it. But one thing was clear. If the satellite had truly been designed as a beacon, then what it was guarding might not stay silent for long, and so the story begins. A forgotten satellite, a set of mysterious coordinates, and a man who cannot ignore the call. The frozen lands of Siberia wait in silence the world does not yet know. But something terrifying is waking beneath the ice. Dr. Alexei Morozov could not escape the numbers. Even when he closed his eyes, the coordinates burned like fire in his mind. At the observatory, he had seen fear on the faces of his colleagues. They wanted to lock the data away, hide it under military orders. But Alexei was different. He was not only a scientist, he was the son of a man who once served the Soviet Union during its darkest secrets. His father, Colonel Viktor Morozov, had whispered stories when Alexei was just a boy. Stories of places hidden from maps, places where men vanished, places where the Soviets tested things that did not belong to this earth. Alexei had never believed those tales. He had thought they were only the dreams of an old soldier. But now, staring at the revived signal, he remembered every word. The coordinates matched one of those places, the forbidden zone called Zashida. Protection. At first, Alexei tried to ignore the obsession. He told himself he was imagining it. He told himself that the signal was only a technical curiosity. But at night, he dreamed of the snow-covered land. He dreamed of dark tunnels beneath the ice. He dreamed of something breathing in the darkness. Waiting for him, he woke up with sweat on his face, his heart racing. The call was growing stronger. The government had ordered silence. No one was to speak of the satellite or its transmission. The files were classified, but Alexei knew too much already, and knowledge is like a poison. Once inside, it spreads, it consumes. He could not walk away. In the following days, he began to gather everything he could find. Old archives, secret papers from his father's belongings. He searched through dusty boxes hidden in his family's dacha. Among them, he found a notebook with sketches of strange machines. One page carried a hand-drawn map. It was crude, but the location was the same as the coordinates his father had known. His father had seen it with his own eyes. Alexei sat in silence, staring at the notebook. On the last page, there was a single line written in his father's handwriting. It said, "We locked it under the ice, and we prayed it would never wake." Alexei's hands shook as he traced the letters. The fear in his father's words was clear. This was no ordinary secret. This was something humanity was never meant to touch, but curiosity is stronger than fear. Alexei felt an invisible rope pulling him toward Siberia. Every day he resisted, but every night the pull grew heavier. Finally, he made a choice. He would go. He would see with his own eyes what the satellite was pointing at. Even if it meant never returning, he began preparing quietly. He told no one at the observatory. Instead, he contacted old friends who owed him favors. He bought survival gear, maps, and cold weather equipment. He studied the terrain, the forests, and the rivers. The journey would be brutal. Temperatures would fall below -30, but Alexei no longer cared. The obsession was stronger than reason. Before leaving, he visited his father's grave. Snow covered the headstone. He brushed it away with his gloved hand. "I know you tried to warn me," Alexei whispered, "but I must see it myself." The wind howled, as if answering. The frozen cemetery stood silent, but in his heart, Alexei felt a strange sadness, almost as if his father's spirit begged him to turn back. That night, as he packed his final things, Alexei's radio crackled. A voice spoke for only a second, distorted, broken, but clear enough. It repeated the same coordinates, then silence. Alexei froze. He was not even tuned to the satellite frequency. The voice had reached him directly. Like a whisper crawling through the wires, the signal was following him now. It was personal. When morning came, Alexei stood at the edge of the train platform. The Siberian train was old and slow. Its iron body groaned as steam hissed from its pipes. He stepped aboard, carrying only a backpack and his father's notebook. The journey began. Through endless fields of snow and forests of black trees. Past villages where windows glowed faintly in the night. but Alexei saw none of it. His eyes were always on the notebook, on the map that led to the forbidden land. Other passengers whispered. About him, they noticed his pale face, his restless eyes, but Alexei did not care. He was already lost in his thoughts. Every hour brought him closer. Every mile carried him deeper into the mystery. The satellite had chosen him. He could feel it in his bones. And he would not stop until he reached the place where his fathers. Nightmare began as the train rumbled into the heart of Siberia. The snow outside grew thicker. The sky darker, and far above them all, in the silent void of space, the Soviet satellite continued to transmit, cold, patient, unstoppable, waiting for Alexei to arrive at the coordinates. Waiting for him to see the truth, waiting for something that had been buried for 60 years to awaken again. The train carried Alexei deeper into the frozen wilderness. The world outside the window looked endless, white fields stretching to the horizon. Forests of black pines rose like walls of silence. Each village they passed grew smaller, poorer, and lonelier. It was as if civilization itself was fading, and the deeper he went, the more he felt the invisible weight pressing on his chest. At one stop, Alexei left the train. He stepped into a place that felt more like the end of the world than a town. Wooden houses leaned against each other, their roofs buried in snow. The streets were empty except for stray dogs. The cold cut through his coat like a knife. This was the last settlement before the Forbidden Zone. Beyond this point, there were no towns, no maps, no help. Only ice, forests, and forgotten secrets. Alexei knew he could not survive alone. He needed others, people who understood the land. In the village tavern, he found them. 3 men sat in the corner, drinking from old metal cups. Hunters, trappers, men with faces carved by frost and silence. They looked at Alexei with suspicion. Foreigners rarely came here, and when they did, they were usually lost. Desperate, or both. "I need guides," Alexei said in a low voice. "I am going north, beyond the old river." The men stopped drinking. Their eyes narrowed. The room grew quiet. One of them finally spoke. "You don't want to go there." "Professor, that land eats men," another muttered. The old ones still walk there. Alexei felt a chill run down his spine. But he showed them money, more than they would earn in months. Reluctantly, they agreed, but their eyes told him the truth. They did not believe they would return. 2 days later, the journey began. The team moved across the snow on old snowmobiles. The engines roared in the silence of the wilderness. Behind them, the village disappeared, swallowed by the storm. Ahead of them stretched only white emptiness. The wind screamed across the plains. Snowflakes cut into their faces like glass. The deeper they traveled, the more lifeless the land became. No birds in the sky. No animals on the ground, only silence, broken by the growl of their machines. At night, they built a small campfire. The hunters whispered in their own language. They spoke of lights in the forest, of voices that called from the wind. Alexei listened in silence, pretending not to hear, but inside, his heart pounded, because he had begun to hear them too. At first, it was faint, like static, but soon, in the crackling of the fire, in the howl of the storm, he could hear a voice repeating the same numbers. The coordinates, always the coordinates. On the 3rd day, their radios began to break. Static filled the speakers, then strange sounds, not human, not animal. One of the hunters swore and smashed his device against the ground. But Alexei clutched his own radio tightly, because through the static he heard something else. A whisper, soft and chilling. It said his name, not once, but over and over. Alexei. Alexei. Fear spread through the group. The hunters wanted to turn back, but Alexei would not allow it. He showed them the map. He promised them more money. He told them they were close, but deep down, Alexei was not thinking about money or science anymore. He was being pulled forward by something he could not explain. Something that felt alive. The obsession had grown into something darker. It was no longer curiosity. It was hunger. On the fifth night, they reached the old river. The ice stretched wide like a frozen scar. The hunters crossed carefully, the sound of cracking echoing under their boots. Halfway across, the youngest of them froze. He pointed at the sky, his hands shaking above the forest. Lights moved in the darkness. They were not stars, not planes. They shifted, flickered, and pulsed like living things. The hunters muttered prayers. One whispered, "The sky burns." Alexei could not look away. The lights were moving in patterns. Almost like they were guiding him. Almost like they were waiting by the seventh day. Their fuel was running low. One snowmobile broke down, abandoned in the snow. The men grew tired, their faces pale. They spoke less and less, but Alexei grew more alive. The closer he came, the more energy he felt. It was as if the land itself was filling his veins with fire. The hunters looked at him with fear. They saw how his eyes burned, how his hands trembled with excitement. They realized he was no longer just a scientist. He was a man consumed. That night, the wind carried a sound none of them could explain. It was deep, heavy, and endless, like the heartbeat of something sleeping beneath the ice. The hunters refused to move further. They said the land was cursed. They said men who walked beyond this point never came back. But Alexei did not listen. He stood on the edge of the camp, staring north. The coordinates burned in his mind, and in the distance he thought he saw it, a black shape rising from the snow, the ruins of a forgotten Soviet bunker. The first sign that the journey was almost over. The black shape in the snow grew larger. As the team moved closer, the hunters walked in silence, their faces pale under the dim light of the moon. What they saw was not a mountain or a rock. It was steel, cold and rusted, rising from the ice like the bones of a buried giant, an old Soviet bunker, half swallowed by decades of snow and storms. Its walls were cracked, its surface eaten by time. But it was still there, waiting, as if frozen in a moment of history. The men stopped at a distance. None of them wanted to go closer. One whispered that this was cursed ground. Another said it should have stayed hidden. Alexei ignored them. His eyes burning with obsession, he felt the pull stronger than ever. It was as if the bunker itself was calling his name. He stepped forward, his boots sinking into the snow. The hunters did not follow. They stayed back, crossing themselves, muttering prayers. But Alexei's mind was already trapped inside the steel walls before he even touched them. The bunker door was half buried, its metal surface covered in frost and ice. Alexei scraped at it with his gloved hand. Letters appeared, faded but still readable. They were in Russian, and they said, "Do not enter." His breath clouded the frozen air as he read the words. But instead of fear, he felt excitement. The warning was not enough to stop him. It only pushed him further. He pushed the heavy door with all his strength. It groaned like a dying animal. Rust and ice cracked under the pressure. At last, it opened just enough for him to squeeze inside. The hunters shouted from behind, begging him to stop, but Alexei did not listen. He stepped into the darkness of the bunker. The air inside was thick, old, filled with the smell of metal and dust. His flashlight cut through the black, and what it revealed made his heart race. Maps, hundreds of maps covered the walls. Some were of Siberia, marked with red circles. Others were of the night sky, filled with strange symbols, lines connected. The stars and patterns that did not belong to human astronomy. In the center of the room stood broken machines. Rusty computers, tape recorders, and strange equipment with blinking lights. But none of them were connected to power. Still, one screen flickered for a moment as Alexei approached. Numbers appeared. The same coordinates again and again, over And over, repeating like a heartbeat, Alexei's breath quickened. He touched the screen with his hand. It was warm, impossibly warm. The hunters, who had reluctantly followed him inside, muttered in fear. One of them spat on the floor and said this was not a place for men. But Alexei's obsession was stronger. He searched every corner of the bunker, and in the farthest room he found something worse, a staircase leading down. Carved into the ice itself, the walls were lined with steel plates. But they were cracked and bent. It looked as though something beneath had been trying to push its way out. The hunters refused to go any further. They begged Alexei to leave. One of them even dropped his pack and ran back toward the snowmobiles. But Alexei only stared at the dark stairway. He could hear faint sounds coming from below, metallic echoes. Slow and steady, like chains being dragged across stone, or like a machine breathing in the darkness. His hands shook, but not from cold. It was excitement, hunger, fear, all mixed into one. He turned back to the two hunters who remained. You? Don't understand, he whispered. This is what the satellite was guarding. This is why it woke up. But the hunters shook their heads. They said men were not meant to disturb the dead. Alexei's eyes narrowed. He felt the choice before him: turn back and live with the mystery, or step forward and uncover the truth. For Alexei, there was no choice at all. That night, they camped. Near the bunker, the storm raged above them, shaking the tents. The hunters barely slept. But Alexei sat awake, staring at the black door leading underground. In the howling wind, he thought he heard whispers, not from the hunters, not from the storm, but from beneath the ice. The voices were calling his name, calling him deeper. And in the flashes of lightning, he saw the bunker glow faint. Red, as if something inside was waking, as if something inside was waiting for him to arrive. By dawn, Alexei had made up his mind. He would go down the staircase. He would see what had been buried for 60 years, no matter what it was, no matter what waited. The signal was not finished. The coordinates were not the end. They were only the beginning, and so the bunker stood in silence. Snow falling gently around it. The hunters whispered to each other. Some wanted to flee, others wanted to destroy the place, but Alexei only smiled because he knew the truth. The satellite had not reactivated by chance. It had reactivated to guide him here, to this place, to the stairway leading into the heart of the ice, where something ancient waited, something that should never have been found. The storm had passed by morning, but the air around the bunker was heavy. The hunters whispered nervously, refusing to step closer to the stairway. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with silent fear. But Alexei no longer felt fear. He felt something stronger. A burning curiosity that had turned into obsession. The coordinates had led him here. And the bunker had answered. Now the stairway waited like an open mouth in the ice, and Alexei knew he would go down no matter the cost. He strapped his flashlight to his chest and checked his pack. The hunters begged him not to enter. One said the land was cursed. Another swore he heard voices under the ice. But Alexei's mind was already below. He told them they could wait, or they could leave. It made no difference. He stepped onto the first frozen stair. The air grew colder, pressing against his skin. Like a weight, each step echoed, long and hollow. The deeper he went, the darker it became. The light from the surface faded until only his beam cut the black. The stairway led to a massive steel door. It was unlike anything Alexei had seen before. Not Soviet design, not human design. The surface was covered in strange markings, symbols that curved like living veins when his light touched them. They seemed to shimmer faintly. The hunters above shouted for him to return. But Alexei pressed his hand against the door. It was warm, pulsing softly, almost like the heartbeat of something alive. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like grinding stone, the door shifted, The cracks glowed red, light spilling out as if from a furnace. The hunters ran back from the stairway in terror, but Alexei stepped forward, his eyes wide. The door opened just enough for him to slip inside, and when he crossed the threshold, the world around him changed. The chamber was enormous, carved into the ice, but filled with machines. Towering structures of steel and black stone stretched into the darkness. Cables hung from the ceiling like vines. Some still sparked with dim, unnatural light. In the center of the room stood a vast, circular platform, its surface engraved with the same alien symbols. Alexei's breath caught in his throat. This was not a Soviet creation. The Soviets had found this place, not built it. The satellite had not been a weapon. It had been a beacon, a warning. His flashlight flickered as he stepped onto the platform. For a moment, he thought he heard whispers again. They were clearer now. Stronger, not random sounds, but a language. He could not understand the words, but he felt their meaning. They spoke of awakening, of release, of something long asleep under the ice. Alexei's heart raced. His father's warning echoed in his mind. We locked it under the ice, and we prayed it would never wake. Now he understood. The Soviets had not buried a secret for power. They had buried a prison. He found a desk pushed against the wall. Papers covered in dust lay scattered across it. He picked one up, his hands trembling. The yellowed page carried Russian writing. The words were short, sharp, written in panic. They came from the ground, not the sky. They are not dead, only waiting. Do not break the seal. Alexei dropped the paper, his pulse hammering in his ears. But instead of turning back, he stepped deeper into the chamber. In the far corner stood a machine half buried in ice. It looked like a generator, but its shape was wrong. Too smooth, too curved, too alive. The Soviets had wrapped chains around it. But the chains were broken, and faint red light pulsed from within the cracks. Alexei stared in awe. It was beautiful. And terrifying. He felt his mind drowning in thoughts that were not his own. Visions of stars, of endless black, of shapes moving between worlds. He fell to his knees, gasping. The whispers filled his skull. Louder than ever, they were calling. Him, choosing him. Above, the hunters shouted his name, their voices filled with fear. One of them dared to step onto the stairs. But when he looked inside the chamber, he froze. His scream echoed against the steel. He ran back to the surface and vanished into the storm. Alexei barely noticed. He was lost in the whispers. The chamber was alive now. Machines hummed faintly. Lights flickered. Something was waking. Something that had been locked away for a reason. Alexei staggered back toward the door. For a moment, fear returned. He realized what he had done. The satellite had reactivated not to guide, but to warn. It had screamed into the void of space for 60 years, praying humanity would stay away. But now the door was open, and the prison was no longer sealed. The ground shook violently. Ice cracked overhead. Chunks falling into the chamber. The machines roared to life, though no power fed them. Alexei ran up the stairway, his flashlight swinging wildly. The hunters grabbed him, dragging him into the snow behind them. The steel door glowed bright red. The sound of chains breaking thundered through the earth, and a deep, hollow roar echoed from beneath the ice. Not human, not animal, something ancient, something that should have never been touched. Alexei fell into the snow, gasping for breath. The hunters stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. One shouted, "You have killed us all." But Alexei did not answer, because deep down, he already knew the truth. The satellite had not been protecting a secret, it had been protecting the world. And now, that protection was broken. The snow trembled under their feet. A low rumble rolled through the ground. Deep and endless, the hunters clutched their packs, their eyes wide with panic. But Alexei could not move. He stared at the bunker as the steel door glowed brighter. Red light leaked from the cracks like blood seeping from a wound. The air was heavy, filled with a strange vibration. It pressed against their chests, it rattled in their bones, it felt alive. As if the earth itself was breathing, the hunters shouted, their voices broken by fear. "We must leave now before it comes out," but Alexei only whispered, "What?" Is it? His words vanished in the howling wind from deep below. The chains snapped one by one. The sound was not of metal breaking. It was like screams echoing through the ice. Each snap carried across the frozen plain until even the storm seemed to fall silent. Listening, one of the hunters dropped his pack and fled into the storm. The other stood frozen, torn between fear and loyalty. But Alexei stepped forward. Every part of him wanted to run, and yet something stronger pulled him closer. The whispers filled his mind again. They were louder, clearer now. They spoke in a language not of this world, but somehow Alexei understood. They were not words of warning, they were words of welcome. The ground shook again. Snow slid from the roof of the bunker. Crashing into the drifts, the door moved, slow and heavy. A flood of red light poured out, cutting the night apart. The hunter screamed and stumbled back, but Alexei stood at the edge, bathed in the glow. His heart pounded like a drum. His breath came fast, white clouds bursting in the cold air. Something was moving inside, something vast. Something that had waited too long. Then the machines inside roared to life. The platform in the chamber spun slowly. Sparks jumped across the walls, and the markings carved into the steel began to glow. Symbols no human had ever written. Symbols that shifted like they were alive. The whispers rose into a chorus, thousands of voices overlapping. Some sounded human, some did not. It was a hymn of awakening, a song of something breaking free. One hunter fell to his knees, sobbing. He prayed to a god that would not hear him in this place. The other grabbed Alexei by the arm. "Please," he begged, "we must run. This is not for us." But Alexei tore his arm free. His eyes were fixed on the light. His voice was steady, almost calm. "This is why the satellite woke. This is why it called us," the hunter shouted. "No, it warned us." But Alexei shook his head. "No, it chose me." The roar from below grew louder. The snow cracked around the bunker. Fissures spread like spiderwebs across the ice. Steam hissed from the ground. The air stank of metal and burning stone. And then it happened. The light inside pulsed once, twice, then burst outward. The hunters were thrown to the ground. Alexei stumbled, but did not fall. His eyes glowed with the reflection of the red fire. He saw shapes moving in the chamber, tall, shadowed figures pressing against the ice. Not machines, not men, something in between. For a heartbeat, silence returned. The snow fell gently again. The world looked calm, almost peaceful. And then the first figure stepped out. Its form was half hidden by the storm. Its body shimmered. Like liquid metal, its eyes burned with a dull red glow. It was not alive in the way humans were alive. It was something older. Something that had been locked away for a reason. The hunter who prayed, screamed, and ran. He vanished into the storm. Only Alexei and one man remained. The survivor grabbed Alexei again. His voice was raw with terror. "If you stay, you will die here." But Alexei whispered, "If I leave, I will never know the truth." His face twisted with a strange smile. It was no longer fear that guided him. It was devotion. The whispers were no longer outside. They were inside his mind, filling every corner, claiming him. The figure moved closer. The snow melted under its steps. The ice cracked like glass. The survivor fired his rifle in desperation. The bullets vanished into the creature's body like stones into water. It did not even slow. It only turned its glowing eyes toward him. The hunter screamed, dropped his weapon, and ran. This time, Alexei did not follow. He stepped forward instead, his hands shaking, his breath shallow. The creature stopped in front of him. It leaned closer. The whispers filled his skull until he thought it would split apart, and then silence, for one terrifying moment. Nothing moved. The storm, the earth, even his heartbeat seemed to stop. Alexei's eyes met the creature's, and he understood. This was not the beginning of discovery. This was the beginning of release. The satellite had not been a guide. It had been a lock, a final chain across the sky, and Alexei had broken it. The figure stepped back into the chamber. Its form vanished into the red glow, but the whispers remained. Alexei fell to his knees, laughing and crying at the same time. He knew what would happen next. The others would awaken too. One by one, the chains would break, and when they rose, the world above would no longer be safe. Far above. The silent satellite turned slowly in orbit. Its signal changed. It no longer sent only the Siberian coordinates. Now it pulsed outward, stronger, clearer. New numbers appeared, coordinates of other places, other prisons, other awakenings. And the Earth, unknowing, continued to spin, as something older than mankind stretched its limbs beneath the ice, breathing for the first time in 60 years. And waiting to rise again, the frozen earth split beneath their feet. Cracks opened like black veins in the snow. Steam and red light poured upward, staining the stormy sky. The air trembled with the roar of something ancient, something that had been chained for generations. Now the chains were gone. Alexei stood motionless in the storm, his coat whipped by the wind, his face pale with awe. The last hunters screamed his name, begging him to run, but Alexei could not hear. The whispers inside his head drowned out every other sound. They filled him with fire and shadow. They told him he was chosen. They told him he had done what must be done. From the glowing doorway of the bunker, more figures stepped forward. Tall, metallic, half-human shadows. Their forms bent and shifted as if they were made of liquid steel. Their eyes burned red, cutting through the blizzard. Each step they took shook the earth. The snow hissed and melted under their feet. They did not walk like soldiers. They moved like predators, slow, patient, certain. They had all the time in the world. The last hunter fired his rifle until the barrel smoked. But the bullets were useless. The creatures did not bleed, did not fall, did not even flinch. One turned its head toward him. Its gaze alone made the man collapse. He dropped his weapon and ran into the darkness of the forest. His screams carried by the storm until they faded. Leaving Alexei alone, the whispers grew louder. They no longer came only from the creatures. They came from the earth itself, from the air, from the storm. Thousands of voices pressing into Alexei's mind. He clutched his head, falling to his knees in the snow. But even through the pain, he smiled because he understood the truth. The Soviets had not discovered something new. They had uncovered something buried. Something older than mankind, and the satellite had been a lock, a warning sent to the stars. But now the lock was broken, and the warning had turned into a signal of release. The bunker roared like a furnace. Red light became blinding, shooting into the clouds above. The storm twisted violently. The sky burned with strange patterns of light, symbols that mirrored the ones carved into the chamber walls. It was not natural lightning. It was a message, not for men, but for something else. Something watching beyond the sky. Alexei staggered to his feet. His eyes glowed faintly in the red light. His voice trembled as he whispered, "They are not coming. They are already here." And in that moment, he knew the satellite had not only awakened Siberia. It had awakened all of them. Other prisons hidden across the world, other chains breaking in the dark. The earth shuddered as if answering his thoughts. Far away, thunder rolled, but it was not thunder. It was something. Breaking free, the creatures stood in a circle around the bunker. Their glowing eyes fixed on the sky, they raised their arms slowly, in perfect unison. The storm screamed louder. The snow lifted from the ground, spinning in the air, and then silence. For one terrifying second, the entire world seemed to stop. The wind froze, the earth held its breath, and then came the sound. A roar so deep it shook the horizon. A voice not made for human ears. It rolled across the frozen plains, across forests and mountains, a signal of awakening. A declaration that the world was no longer theirs. Alexei fell to the ground, tears freezing on his face. He was terrified, yet filled with joy. He whispered to himself, "This is the truth. This is why I was called far above the satellite." Pulsed again, its signal no longer secret, no longer faint. Now it screamed across the sky, beaming coordinates not only to Siberia, but to every major city on Earth. Moscow, New York, London, Beijing, Tokyo. The numbers repeated endlessly. A countdown, a summons, a warning too late. The ground shook violently once more. The ice split open, swallowing trees and snowmobiles. Flames burst upward from the cracks. The creatures moved back into the fissures, their red eyes glowing from the depths below. Alexei tried to crawl to the edge. His voice broken. "Take me with you," he whispered. But the fissure closed. The earth sealed itself in silence. And only the storm remained. The hunters who had fled never returned. The forest swallowed them. Some say their bodies were found years later, frozen in terror. Others say they vanished forever, taken by the whispers. But Alexei Morozov was never seen again. Only his pack was found, half buried in the snow near the bunker. Inside it was his father's notebook. The final page smeared with ink. 4 words written in a shaking hand. "They are not sleeping," and above, the silent Soviet satellite turned once more. Its transmission grew stronger, not fading, not slowing. Its pulse reached across oceans, across continents, until the whole world began to listen, until the whole world began to fear, because what had awakened in Siberia was only the beginning, and the final terror had only just begun.